My name is Lyse Doucet. I'm a girl from small town Canada, the country to the north. And this is Columbia University Journalism School. I never went to journalism school. I didn't want to go, but you know, today I'm changing my mind. What a great, great honor and surprise to be with you here today. With the more than 300 graduates, and with so many of the people who matter so much to you, your family, your friends, your faculty. And to your faculty, I owe the greatest of thanks for this recognition. And in your faculty, Professor Howard French, who won, yes indeed, he wins your applause today, and yesterday I heard he won the Teacher of the Year award. Now, because Steve Call made such a big thing about me being such a great journalist, I have to tell you a bit of news, but it's off the record. Howard French is one of the very first foreign correspondents I ever met in my life. 33 years ago, in West Africa, in Côte d'Ivoire. We were baby journalists then. Except I was crawling and Howard was walking. And even then, I was so impressed by how cool, how confident he was. Still is, huh? And when I received the email from Dean Steve Call a few months ago on my iPhone, I read it 3 times. First of all, I read it, and I had a sharp intake of breath. Then later in the day, I took another peek, and I read it again in case I got it wrong. Then I waited to the next day, and I thought, oh my God, I haven't replied. What are they going to think? So I read it again, because I couldn't afford to get it wrong. It was from Steve Call, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, the journo genius I met nearly 3 decades ago. He's a bit intimidating, isn't he? But he's very nice. And so today I thank you, Steve Call, I thank Howard French, and I thank all of the faculty. And I thank you for allowing me to share your day. When a journalist travels, we go in search of a story. And so it is today as I join you. And what is your story, the class of 2016? I'm still piecing it together. I'm told of a class which comes from across the United States and across the world. From Korea to Kenya, from South Africa to Saudi Arabia. Do you remember when you received that email, that acceptance letter from Columbia University? Did you, like me, have to read it 3 times? Or did you immediately scream, so to speak? Hashtag, oh my God, exclamation mark. Emoji, clap, clap. You had arrived. And now, you're going. You're going into a world of journalism that even in the year and more that you have been here has changed. It is changing every year, and it will keep changing. So what about us, the journalists? I'm told you're a class that cares about the world beyond, but you're also a class that wonders and worries. I'm told that some of you will go armed with one of the best degrees in journalism the world can offer to countries with some of the worst conditions the world can offer, places of censorship, security risks, repression. Others worry that journalism jobs are hard to find and that doing good journalism is getting harder. When I asked about your class, I was told a story about a student who spent time during the winter break in the French port city of Calais, in the informal, squalid refugee camp they call the jungle, a place not fit for humans. And that student came back exhilarated by the reporting he was able to do, but also frustrated, ambivalent, and asking, what difference did it make? And if not? As a journalist, I believe that the smallest of stories can tell us a much bigger story. So I got in touch with that student, who it turns out is Canadian, like me. And I mention Hassan's story to you today, not because it is any more noble or noteworthy than any of you here today, but perhaps he raises a question that all of us raise, including students like Muna, who I worked with in Pakistan. And she told me about what a tough and challenging year you've had. And Adela, who I met on Twitter, who told me how excited you were, and she's true. What Hassan told me on email, so what is the point of it all? You know the answer. It's even on your Twitter page. Impact. The impact of our journalism. And I was thinking about impact when I went to Calais last month, even before I wrote a single word, because I was challenged there not by a Columbia University graduate like you, but by an Afghan teenager with hardly any school at all. He'd come from a village south of Kabul, divided between the Afghan army and Taliban control, a village where the Taliban said boys and girls couldn't go to school. Like hundreds of children in Calais and thousands now across Europe, this teenager, Sabanullah, was traveling all on his own, sent by his family to reach Europe and to do whatever it took, whether hiding in the back of a lorry, clinging to the bottom of the train, doing everything to reach his relatives in Britain, to reach the possibility of a future, to be educated. And every one of you here today knows exactly what that means. Some of the Afghans, the Syrians, the Sudanese children, all boys I met there, some as young as 10, have been trying for months, some more than a year, to reach that new life. So many of us have told our stories to so many journalists, Sabanullah told me, and it doesn't change anything. Look at me, he cried. Look at the mud, look at the shoes, look at my clothes. And I looked at his eyes, empty, exhausted, even in a life that had only just started. So I spoke about the boys on TV, on radio, online. I posted on social media. I talked to lawyers. I talked to officials from Britain's Foreign Office. I'll talk about it when I go back to Afghanistan. I'm talking about it today. Will it have impact? It won't suddenly make it easier for any of those boys to get to Britain. But it is part of a crucial conversation in our society today that we as journalists are part of. The questions we ask define who we are as journalists. They define the kind of societies we want to live in or aspire to. You've all seen the soul searching among American media about US election coverage. When journalists stop asking questions, stop looking for answers, when journalism is live streams or viral videos, something's missing. Journalism. It's our job. It is what we do. The class of 2016, it's getting a lot harder to do what we do. Let me just mention to you a few other stories that happened in April. Some of them made news in some places, some not at all. April 4th, Iraq. More than 25 Iraqis killed, more than 60 injured in attacks carried out by the so-called Islamic State or Daesh. April 19th, Afghanistan. More than 60 killed, more than 300 injured. It was the worst attack by the Taliban since after the attacks of 9/11. April 28th, Syria. More than 20 killed when a hospital in the rebel-held area of Aleppo was hit. A hospital linked to the medical charity Médecins Sans Frontières. It killed the last pediatrician working in that area, the doctor who takes care of the children. No matter, no wonder they flee. So, graduates, which explosion got the most attention in the United States? A country, you all know, has been heavily engaged in all those wars. Let me give you your last multiple test question here at Columbia. A, the Iraq attack. B, Kabul. C, Aleppo. D, all of the above. E, none of the above. E? E, April 8th. Nearly 800,000 people watched live on the Facebook page of BuzzFeed another explosion. An exploding watermelon. A watermelon destroyed by winding rubber bands around it until it detonates in all directions. A dead watermelon. That explosion accumulated more than 10 million views in the days after. So tell me, graduates, do we all need watermelons, dead or alive, in our journalism? Hashtag watermelons are us. Class of 2016, you are graduating in the worst of times, in the best of times. The best because we live in a world where never have we been so connected, so well educated. Never have there been so many exciting platforms for you to tell their stories. Never has there been such technology which allows us to report live from anywhere at any time in the world. And never has there been a graduating class from the Columbia University School of Journalism where about half of your students come from somewhere else than the United States. The worst of times, because jobs in traditional media are disappearing. Because more and more of the storytelling is being done by people with a smartphone or a digital camera. Everyone thinks they're a journalist now. We live in the best of times. We live in the worst of times. And it can bring out the best in us, or it can bring out the worst. This is your moment, and it is nothing less than a defining moment in journalism. On Monday, the BBC, who I work for, did a special day of coverage called World on the Move, a day to look at the worst refugee crisis in decades, but also a time of unprecedented mobility. We did it the old-fashioned way, we did it the newfangled way. I'm fortunate, I know, because I work for a global public broadcaster which covers the stories I believe matter, and I believe possibly you believe matter too. But let me tell you what I did on that day. My day started at 7 a.m. in the BBC's lovely Art Deco Theatre, 1930s, where we did a live radio program with an audience. And when I wasn't talking, I was taking photos with my iPhone and tweeting. Then after that, I went to another live discussion, live on radio and also on Periscope. And then I went and sat in front of 2 computer screens and a TV screen as Angelina Jolie, who's the UN Special Envoy for Refugees, spoke live in that radio studio I mentioned, live on TV and radio, live on a stream on our Facebook page, BBC News, and I was live on that page taking comments and questions. And whenever and wherever I could, I talked about the real stories, the stories of refugees and migrants, the stories about the boys in Calais. And as I went out the BBC door, a woman stopped me to say, "You know those boys you said are trying to come to Britain? You know, I have an extra room in my house." Person to person, platform to platform, we connect the dots. And then I went home and I sat down with my laptop, my iPhone, my TV. I sat down to think about you, and I Googled the future of journalism, 2016. In 1982, when I graduated in Toronto, it was also a time of recession, a time of few jobs. I wanted to be a foreign correspondent. Every editor I wrote to told me, "Sorry, you need experience." I'd only ever written a few articles for a publication called Real Estate News. Or, "You need a journalism degree." Sorry, class, I didn't want to go to journalism school. So I went to West Africa. I knew a bit about the region since I'd studied it in graduate school. I knew a little bit about speaking French. I worked in a small town in Ivory Coast for a few months as a volunteer teacher, and then I went to the city to become a journalist and found the BBC setting up its first office in West Africa. There I was, wrong accent, wrong country, wrong CV, at the right place and the right time. Gold dust. To this day, wallahi, I believe God was on my side. And Howard French. And today, graduates, I claim the honor of being the first student that Howard French ever taught. 33 years on, I'm still at the BBC. And it would be so nice if I could say to you today that all these years, my life achievement, as this Columbia Prize tells me about, has been a journey of impact and inspiration every step of the way. But I say to you Hassan, to Muna, to Adela, to all of you, journalism is always about exhilaration and frustration. Exhilaration when you do nothing less than not just walking in the margins of history, but right smack in the middle. Anxiety when we worry we can't find the right words or the picture to tell the story. We can't even find the story. Journalism is a lifetime of trying to understand people and societies who seem different from our own, but really aren't. It's believing that for all of the dizzying array of live feeds, Twitter timelines, videos, that in our world, in our profession, the story and the storyteller still matter. It's what we do. In our world, everything has changed, but nothing has changed. Let me tell you one last story. I was recently asked to listen to the crackling radio broadcasts of the man regarded as one of Britain's best war correspondents, Richard Dimbleby. He was part of the BBC's very first war reporting unit, where reporters were dispatched to provide, for the very first time, live daily reports from the front lines during the Second World War. He brought the war into people's homes. 70 years on, his reports took my breath away. Reports about the Belsen concentration camp, where he began by telling us, "I passed through the barrier and found myself in the world of nightmare." A report so distressing, the BBC refused to broadcast it. He threatened to resign if they didn't. And then another. "This is Richard Dimbleby. I am speaking to you while sitting in Hitler's chair." Sitting in Hitler's chair. As abhorrent as that is, he was literally reporting from the seat where a most horrible history of the Holocaust was written and had to be told. And he told all of these stories with the detail that all of us can understand, about faces that were yellow like parchment paper, places which lie crumpled like flowers. Richard Dimbleby came back to London from the front line in 1945. He got the attention of all the BBC bosses. So guess what happened? Yeah, he lost his job. The BBC started cutting back on its reporters. Sound familiar? So what did he do? He joined what was regarded then, and I quote, "the box, an inferior medium of limited potential." Yes, television. And if he was alive today, he'd be broadcasting on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, who knows what. Everything has changed. Nothing has changed. What did Jorge Ramos tell you yesterday about the future of news? That digital, video, and mobile is first. Ignore that, you'll be extinct. How's that for impact? In journalism, we're told about the 5 W's. Do you know them? Who? What? When? Come on, class. Where? You're just graduating, you know. Why? They're the building blocks. Now as you graduate in 2016, there's another W. Watermelon. This is your challenge now, the challenge for our journalism. But we've always had to have a little bit of watermelon in our reporting, the need to keep finding better ways and places to tell our stories. And in our global, interconnected worlds, the stories about Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan aren't stories about there, out there. The rise of the so-called Islamic State, the refugee crisis, the global recession, the stories of young people just like you in so many parts of the world trying to find their way, they're our stories now. And when you leave this hall, whether you go across the world, across the country, or just across the street, you can tell these stories. They're human stories. Because we must fundamentally believe that even if we tell the most complicated and complex of stories, and in my job I tell a lot of them, there are in essence stories like the story of today, human stories. Stories about fathers and mothers and children, about societies and neighborhoods. And so therefore they are stories which can't just be about the gloom and doom. They must also be about humor and hope. Because no matter where you go, you will find everyone has a bit of watermelon in their life. So finally, let me say, the last story I looked at the BBC website before I came to join you in New York was a digital video, a Syrian love story about a woman in the embattled city of Aleppo who married a disabled man. The story of Amina and Mohammed. It didn't get 10 million hits on the BBC website, but it is 2 million and counting, and more like it. The last article I noticed was an investigation into last year's American bombing of a hospital in Afghanistan, also of Médecins Sans Frontières, by a young freelancer, Mathieu Aikens. He's made a name for himself by learning local languages, spending time on the ground, and focusing on what we call, in 2016, the long reads. And the last news I read was that the Afghan journalist Lutfara Najizadeh, who heads the popular Afghan Tolo TV, received an Information Heroes Award in Paris. He's never flinched in the face of pressure, not even threats from the Taliban, including an attack on his employee's bus earlier this year that killed 7 of his staff. Today, there are Lutfilas, there are Mathieu's, there are Howards, there are Steves, there's maybe even Lyses in your midst. For those of you who go to countries where journalism is difficult and dangerous, be careful. And remember, there's always more than one way to tell a story, one way to ask a question, one way to make a difference. Find the way that works, that keeps you working. For those of you who ask, as Hassan did, what is the point of it all? You'll find your answer over time. And some of you may decide that advocacy is a better fit. Or maybe you'll work for an aid agency. Maybe for one reason or another, you'll be a communications person for a major corporation. But all of you, whatever you do, you are all graduates of the Columbia School of Journalism. And everyone here today knows what that means. And we all know what kind of world we live in today. A world of the best times and the worst of times. A world where countless youth too many to count around the world your age, are finding their dreams utterly shattered by conflict, by hardship. A world where a teenager like Sabanhullah is willing to do whatever it takes to get an education. And then, there are all of you. When I graduated 34 years ago and wanted to become a journalist, my sister Andrea gave me a poem by the late Irish poet, the Nobel laureate, Seamus Heaney. It's a short poem, and it goes like this. The way we are living, timorous or bold, will have been our life. The way you live, timorous or bold, will be your life of journalism. And that, class of 2016, has been and will ever be the point of it all. Thank you.